1:37. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Al, would you like to go ahead?
Director McGorty?
Yes.
Director Crane?
Present.
Thank you. Director White?
Here.
Thank you. Director LaRue is absent, as is Director Navarez, as is Director Robinson. However, I will call on alternate Director Gasca.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move to the Pledge of Allegiance. Al, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Next on the list is consent items. And just to bring to everyone's attention, we can continue to meet remotely at this point. Our health order is still in effect. I suspect we'll be opening soon as a county, and we're still discussing the possibility of hybrid meetings. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent item. Second?
Second. This is how I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the consent items. All in favor, or well, do a roll call, please.
Director McGorty?
Yes.
Director. I think you might have frozen there, Director Crane.
Aye.
Thank you. Director White?
Aye.
Thank you. Director LaRue is absent, as is Director Navarez. Alternate Director Gasca?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
I thank you very much. So next on our agenda, under action items, is approval of agreement with West Yost in the amount of $200,000 to perform administrative services for the period beginning upon execution of the agreement through March 31st, 2025, an authorization of fiscal year 2021-22 budget adjustment in the amount of $20,000 for administrative services. Any discussion by staff or by West Yost?
I can introduce this item, Amber Fassett, Mendocino County Water Agency. So pursuant to board direction at the last, I believe, 2 meetings, we've prepared an agreement with West Yost that spans the next, it's three years, 36 months, but spans the next 4 fiscal years because we're almost to the end of this one, for a total of $200,000 to perform administrative services. And we do have Eric Canaray here. And I believe I saw Andy Rogers as well from West Yost, if the board has any questions for them, or I would be happy to answer any questions as well.
Any board questions for our new consultants? Well, I have one. So as we go through the process of grant writing, which we've relied on Mendocino County for in the past, what is kind of our arrangement with you on that, if any?
So under the current contract that we will be approving today, given your guys' approval, it includes services for GSA administration. However, it does not include explicitly services for grant writing. So that would be a separate item to be considered.
And how about grant administration?
Grant administration, I believe, is also under that category, but correct me if I'm wrong, Andy.
I know I can speak to that too. We didn't specifically include those things in this contract. A lot of it had to do with the fact that we didn't know which grants we would be pursuing or managing, and we figured we would take that grant by grant. However, West Yost has the ability to do that, and we can amend this contract as needed. Most likely any grants that we are awarded will include funds for administration, so it wouldn't be an additional cost, but we did actually specifically in our 5-year look ahead budget, we did include funds for grant writing.
Okay.
that were separate from administration services.
Any other questions or on the contract from our board members? Well, just to comment on grants too, Mendocino County may be in a position at times too to be grant writing. We're upping our office of grants, or I should say our division of grants and contracts. And is a long held wish of mine that we build our capacity, because increasingly that's how the state is going to distribute money. And I think it's really important for us to have some backup. And I'm as you know, as a supervisor, I'm pretty sure that we can come into an arrangement, assuming we can cover administrative costs. Al, you have a question?
Yeah. So on the grant business, from what I could see, reading various things, is that the grants, some of these grants are of the money that's available coming down the pike is for administering the grants. I mean, you can basically write a grant to pay for administering your grant, or is that fantasy interpretation on my part?
No, that's true. Usually they allow a certain amount, and it depends on the grant source, but you know, it can be as much, well, depending on who the agency is, it can be as much as 40% when it goes to a university for overhead, but more likely administrative fees are usually around 12% for a lot of grants that the County of Mendocino pursues. So there's an opportunity to cover the costs of grant writing plus also grant administration. Laura, do you have any input on this? I mean, you see lots of grants.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you. So basically, mostly with these drought emergency grants, what we found out is that they are mostly through Department of Water Resources, and they even went ahead and changed the administration cost that we included, and they increased it because they said you need to cover for all these expenses. So your number 10-12%, it's for sure needs to be there. So basically we had a little less, and DWR changed it for one of the Northern California basins. So it's all covered. They want to be sure that there is enough money for the agencies for going through whatever is needed to make it happen. So
Great. Other questions on that? You know, almost all of the state grants require periodic reporting, typically quarterly. When the ones that I've been involved with, it's not too onerous. They have a template that you have to follow. Some of the questions they ask, depending on where their source of money comes from, can be kind of challenging. But you know, it's something that I'm used to having dealt with back in my UC career. Okay. Any other discussion or questions before we call for action on this item?
I have one little question.
Go ahead.
If we pass this item now, then when do they sort of take the reins? This afternoon, tomorrow?
Sort of. It would be, you know, sort of immediate, although there of course is going to be a transition period where we sort of transfer the reins. We'll discuss it. It's actually a later agenda item, but we plan to hold a workshop sometime next month to sort of facilitate the transition. Hopefully a joint board and TAC workshop, and we'll discuss the details of that later. But yes, it would take place following this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Clock starts running then.
Okay. Would anyone care to move the recommended action?
This is Al. I'll move the recommended action.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded.
Sorry, who was that on the second? I didn't quite
Adam.
see. Thank you.
Okay, let's have a call for the vote, please.
Director McGorty,
Yes?
Director Crane,
Aye.
Director White,
Aye.
Director LaRue is absent, and Director Navarez is absent. Alternate Director Gasca?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
This is Zach Robinson. I'm joining the meeting a little bit late.
Hi, Zach. Welcome. Better late than never.
Thank you. I'll note that in a minute.
Okay, so next we'll move on to item B, which is the presentation from Larry Walker Associates on the first draft, first annual report and discussion to finalize the report for submittal on April 1st, 2022.
I'm gonna, Adam, or do you wanna, or?
I think
Amir
Amir will be sharing the screen
Okay.
and going through it. Amir, does it work? Okay, it's coming.
Yeah, I think I shared, the correct screen.
Yeah, you just have to go straight to the annual report.
Okay. Let me. Okay, I'm your money Larry Walker Associate. Sorry for the complication. This is for the annual report that we are preparing for the GSA, and it needs to be submitted by April 1st, basically 3 weeks from now. We discussed how we're going about producing this deliverable in the last board meeting that we have. And I'm going to go briefly through the same slide that we had last time, and then I move to the results. Basically, what we are required to do is based on the GSP emergency regulations. This is the minimum that we are required to do. We can add information that we think would be helpful in each annual report, but this is what we are required at the minimum to provide. So there's a general information in the beginning, which includes the executive summary and map of area of the basin, the GSA, and how it works basically, and the GSP itself, a brief summary of the GSP. Then it goes to the meat of the annual report, which is based on groundwater elevations and groundwater extractions and water use, and then change of storage. So on the groundwater elevation side, there are specific things that we are required to provide. One is the contour maps of the groundwater elevations, and the other one is the hydrographs of each well that we include in the monitor network. And then for groundwater extractions, we need to provide water use for different use types in the basin, as we did for the GSP. And then we need to provide how we estimated that and how accurate those are. So, for example, like we had data for municipal use by the city, or we had data for water use from the small water agencies. So we include those and say they're accurate, they're measured data. And then for agricultural use, we used a model IDC to estimate the water use. So for that, we should provide the estimation accuracy. And then for the change in groundwater storage, we need to provide how maps of the storage change, and also a graph that shows how much storage has been changing during the years, at least going back to 2015. And the last part is basically a progress toward implementation, which doesn't really apply to this year, but it includes the implementation of projects and management actions, any specific issues that happened during the year, or any specific things that a GSA or agencies did in the basin, and then a comparison of sustainable management criteria in the basin. So as I mentioned, for this water year, which is 2021, since the GSP was not yet submitted, it's kind of a special year to submit the annual report. So the data was basically is basically for the period that the GSP was being planned and produced, but from the next year things would be a bit different. So we set up the same structure, and we're going about producing the annual report the same that we went about producing the GSP. So when the data changes and everything, it actually relies on the data management system. So each year when the data changes, most of the annual report can be updated automatically. And we went through the sections. I'm just showing to you how the annual report was provided. We sent a draft to the board members on Monday. It's been a short period, but it has more data and information if you want to go through it. There are some placeholders because of data gaps that we have, that we are expecting data, but otherwise, most of the things that I show is also included in the annual report draft that we sent to you. So the first item is the groundwater elevations. Before I go through it, since it's a bit confusing even for us when we're developing it, so we are talking about the water year 2021, which starts from October 2020 to October 2021. So whatever we show in terms of fall of the year is basically last fall, not this fall. So we're talking about last fall and this spring, basically. So keeping track of it helps understand when we are comparing the results. We are not really talking about October, November, and December of this year. So the groundwater elevations last year, and this is a comparison between last year and the year before. So water years 2021 and 2020. So it's a subtraction of fall 2020 and fall 2019, and a spring 2021 and spring 2020. So groundwater elevations decline. We were in the midst of a drought. It was comparably historically dry in the basin. Most of the basin, as we put in the annual report, most of the basin you could see between 0 to 10 feet decline in groundwater elevations in fall. You would see a lower amount, but still a lowering in groundwater elevations during the springtime. And that's significant because, as we discussed during the GSP development, the basin is dependent on a spring recharge, and it recovers during the spring. So if the spring shows a decline, it means the basin was not fully recovered. There are portions of the basin, and we discussed it in detail yesterday during the TAC meeting, that show more than 10 feet. Specifically, there is Redwood Valley, and then there is an area in the south of the basin. Redwood Valley can be caused because of some uncertainty in data that we have. So that should be considered when you look at the data. Similarly, for the boundaries of the basin that you see, there are a density of lines, a high density of lines there. Those are mostly due to the groundwater elevation contours, but in the middle of the basin that we have good data, basically Redwood Valley is a shallower basin, and its impacts would show more immediately than the other parts of the basin. It doesn't have this stream flow either, so we expected more impacts in Redwood Valley, and that shows up in terms of groundwater elevation declines. So the next thing, let's just look at the hydrographs, and we have all the monitoring networks in the appendix for the annual report, but these are the ones that we call representative monitoring points, that the wells that are a bit more important to us because we have the criteria set on these wells. So we need to compare these wells levels to our set criteria and say the GSP or the basin is working fine with regards to GSP or not. So this is the aquifer 1, our shallower upper aquifer. And we are talking about fall 2020. Again, I continued the hydrograph so we can see this year's level. It's more informative. But basically, in all the hydrographs, we are talking about this portion of the hydrograph, basically 2020 to 2021. And you could see that there is a decline, and it is obvious because we were in a drought during these 2 years. The more important thing to look at is actually the spring. Like the fall is a bit lower than historical low falls, but the spring does not go up as it normally should. So there is no recovery, basically. There was no rain, basin doesn't recover, it stays in the same level. So the fall would be worse if things continue the same as historical. Thankfully, that was not the case significantly, like the fall was lower, but not that much lower than spring was. So the measures that were taken in the basin helped. And then this spring, like this fall, the rains that came like during the past 3-4 months actually pushed the levels a bit higher than the past 2 years. So overall, what I can say is groundwater elevations were low. We actually reached in some parts lower than measurable objectives that we set. We went through what we call the flexibility area, like the operational flexibility. So we were close, but in terms of complying with the SIGMA regulations and the GSP that we put together, we're still complying. But like for this well, for example, we were pretty close this fall, to the minimum threshold. On the second aquifer, the same pattern is obvious. Again, you can see like the fall 2020 was low. This fall was even lower before we get the rains for both. So we had 3 wells in this basin. One of the wells was supposed to be monitored by DWR and it wasn't. And we are following up with DWR to see what happened. But these 2 that were monitored by CASGEM and the MCRCD show that we are in a kind of an alarming situation in terms of fall, but we will end up. So we got close to the minimum threshold. And these minimum thresholds, as you know, we set based on the elevations of the last drought, plus some margin of uncertainty. And it shows that basically it is comparable to the last drought, the elevations that we have. So not good in terms of conditions, but not in undesirable result conditions. We are still fine. But we should be continuing what's happening in the basin since we are still not out of the woods in terms of historical elevations. Al, I see your hands up. I can stop in between the presentation. I think it's more helpful to answer the questions while we're going through it.
It's probably a stupid question. What does the yellow line, green line, and the red line represent?
No, a very good question. Actually, I had to mention it before. So the yellow line is the only line that is compared to spring elevations, and that's our triggers. So it's not a regulatory requirement, but we set it just to get a notice if the conditions of the basin are going to be alarming. So we compare the spring elevations to these triggers, and if it's lower, basically it triggers hit, and you have to be more cautious. And you can see that the spring elevations practically hit the triggers. All other lines are compared to fall elevations. So the green one is the measurable objective. That's the elevation we want to hit in 20 years. The red line is the minimum threshold. That's the elevation we don't want to pass. If we pass 2 years straight, we're basically in non-compliance with what you said. And those dashed lines are basically 5-year milestones that we want to go from minimum threshold to measurable objective in this next 20 years. So the first dashed line we need to hit in 2027, the second one 5 years after, and the third one after that. So I would say we weren't in the minimum threshold area, but we came close. So it wasn't that good, to be honest, in terms of the elevations that we had.
So Amira, what is your definition of the red, or the trigger, the red line that you have in there?
So the definition of the groundwater elevation that we said was for all of the wells. For the aquifer one, which was shallower and closer to the stream, basically we went with the average of, so it was a kind of a twofold condition. So if we had a long history of data, we went with the average of 3 lowest elevations, and we added a margin of uncertainty because that might have not been the lowest elevation measured based on the date that they measured it. So that margin for aquifer one was just 5% because we wanted to keep it more stringent for the river, for the depletion. For the aquifer 2 that you're looking at right now, it was 10%. So we added 10% to it. But if we didn't have a long history of data, which we didn't for most of the wells, I went just to the last drought, basically 2014, we just used the worst case. So the worst elevation that happened probably in 2014, we added a margin of uncertainty to it, and that was the red line. For the green line, we used the 75th percentile. If we didn't have a long history of data, And if we had a long history of data, we use the average for that green line. So that's kind of our goal. And the reason that we set it like that is that we assumed and we found out that the basin is generally in good conditions. So continuing the historical conditions would be fine in terms of our goal. And the trigger, I don't specifically remember what the percent was basically the same concept we used, but based on spring levels. So if the spring level was low, we wanted to get a notice that we're going to have a difficult fall. So the GSA has about 4 or 5 months to implement any actions that it wants to prevent the fall elevations to fall too low and into the minimum threshold zone. So the only good thing is, first of all, the annual report is basically going through this portion of the graphs. So it's not continuing this line. So this good trend, the positive trend, did not show up in the annual report that we're submitting because it actually falls within this year. But the good news is we got a bit better in the past 3-4 months because Basin is very dependent on the rain and the winter and spring season. So it recovered to some extent, much better than last year. But still, it's not comparable to normal historical conditions. So we need to be still cautious about where the basin is going. So in terms of groundwater storage, we need to provide contour maps, and I didn't include it in this presentation, but it's in the annual report. It's a bit confusing to look at, but we have it just to comply with the regulation. So in the GSP, we use the model to calculate the storage. We didn't have the model extended to 2021, so we couldn't really run the model for this annual report. So we used another methodology. Basically, we compared groundwater elevations in the basin for water year 2021 and 2020. We subtracted these elevations. We found that the difference in groundwater elevation, and then we used the aquifer properties to calculate the change in storage. That has been done in other GSPs as well for the critical basins. So what we found out is that if you ignore this part of the graph, which I said just to make sure we start from the same point as the model, the green bars are what the model simulated going back to 1992. So these are changes, annual changes in storage. The black line is cumulative change during the historical period. And then the blue bars is the same as what the green bars represent, but based on the new methodology. So for 2017 and 18, you can see how our new methodology compares to model. So we are underestimating both. So the impacts of the storage might be a bit bigger for the years that we don't have a model simulation, but the trend is the same. And the red line is the same for black line, but basically based on the new methodology. So in both 2020 and 2021 water years, a decline in storage as we expected. We are in drought. The storage will decline. The decline is within historical margins. So as you can see, we had years before based on model simulation that have the similar decline in storage or even bigger. But still, it's 2 consecutive years of decline. And if you look at the cumulative line, we are declining continuously. So the storage has not been historically a problem in the Ukiah Basin. We don't expect it to be if the drought is done, because you can get a big rain and one of these huge bars in the positive and the basin fully recovers. But it is worth noting that if the drought continues, then storage should be monitored as well as a condition that might get worse. So these bars that you see for 2020 are about 600 acre-feet lost in 2020 and about 300 acre-feet lost in 2021. As I said, based on model simulation, probably the number would be more because we are underestimating with the new methodology, but it's still not huge numbers. The other thing that I want to mention is basically the pumping in the basin is variable from year to year, but it's somewhere between 6,000 to 9,000 acre-feet. So if you're losing 600 acre-feet, is 10% of the storage that's being used in the basin. So it's not huge, but it's not as little as the number feels for the basin. In terms of water use, what we need to provide is how much water was used in the basin, groundwater and surface water, and for which type of use. We have the data, we have the model set up, but we are expecting data from IRVA members. We don't have it yet. So we are waiting on that data to be able to calculate this. We got data from the city of Ukiah and the Russian River flood control. We appreciate that, but we're still hoping to get data from IRVA so we can run the analysis. If we don't, for some reason, we have to make an estimation, and we should provide detail to the DWR why that estimation was done. So I'm hoping that we get data in time so we can do this analysis. Other thing is that we're still having data gaps for de minimis users. As you remember, we didn't calculate in the GSP until we do a special study. That probably remains as a data gap in the basin. And then cannabis water use is the other category that we still need to do some further digging in terms of IDC simulation to be able to do the agricultural use calculation.
So on that point, Amir, are you familiar with the work of Ted Grantham and some of the things he's done on cannabis in the North Coast?
Yeah, I
Glenn.
think yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. I don't know how many cannabis grows are inside of the basin, and what their impact is. That's something that we probably might be able to find out from at least legal ones, and the illegal ones are tougher because I'm not sure that we know exactly where they are.
Yeah, I think for those we need to do. I'm hoping during the implementation for the GSP, we're able to make good assumptions on the illegal, and we have data for legal, and then come up with water use as we do for vineyards and other agricultural uses. But as long as we don't have that settled in the GSP, I don't think we want to provide it in the annual report. But that's something that we probably should consider at least for the 5-year review, so we have that at least in the next update of the GSP. So they put it as such as the preliminary suggestion to the tag for one of the topics to consider in the application for grant when we discussed it yesterday. Also the de minimis users too, like the domestic wells, I don't think we have a good estimation of their water use either. So the water quality, groundwater quality, in contrary to the elevation and storage that I showed, is very positive. Groundwater quality in the basin remains very good. So if you remember, we had 5 constituents of concern that we called in the GSP. So it was nitrate, specific conductivity, iron, manganese, and boron. So for iron, manganese, and boron, we didn't set any numbers because most of the wells that exceeded those, requirements or targets from the state or federal regulations, most of those wells was due to natural occurrence or background concentration. We set criteria for nitrate and specific conductivity. So for those 2, we don't have any exceedances. A specific conductivity, the number of samples, I think 4 samples were taken, all of them were around 300, and the target is 900. For nitrate, most of the samples that were taken, I think 12 samples were taken. Most of them were non-detect, and a couple that were detect were around 2 milligram per liter, and the target is 10. So we are in a very good condition in terms of the groundwater quality that we're monitoring. The only constituent that exceeded was manganese, and exceeded in 2 wells that have historical exceedances. So they are over the target for the past few years. I would say the GSA should monitor those, and we should consider if we can help those wells. But it's not a problem that we see GSA addressing. In terms of subsidence, like groundwater quality, there is no subsidence in the basin. We used the recent data DWR published just a couple months ago. All the subsidence that shows, like there's one station that they measure, and based on that, based on satellite data, basically subsidence was not any problem in the basin.
What's the level of accuracy? 0.1 feet doesn't sound like it'd be outside of the margin of error. standard deviation.
That's basically why we set it. Like we set that criteria to say we don't want any actual subsidence to happen in the basin. So our subsidence should be within the margin of error, and that's what happened in what they showed in INSAR data. I think if I remember correctly, when I checked, it was 0.02 or something like that in the station that they measure. For the depletion, which is our most important criteria, if you remember, we set our sustainable management criteria based on groundwater elevations. We said for the first 5 years we're going to do that because we don't have good data to update the model or do otherwise. So we're using groundwater elevation as proxy, and then for the 5-year update, we're going to switch to model and the transects that we just implemented. So for groundwater elevations in those wells, we are still fine. We did not go below minimum threshold, but for the 3 wells, we were very close. So as you can see, like we were practically 2 feet away from minimum thresholds for 2 of them. And the other one that we are 10 feet away, that one has a lot of fluctuation. So the margin of fluctuation is large, and 38 is actually considered pretty close for that well. So we came pretty close for minimum threshold. We didn't pass it. The basin is still fine. But if you look at the triggers like the other one, all the triggers show that we had a bad spring. So we are way over the triggers, and they're showing that we are not in good conditions for depletion. So overall, GSP complied with these conditions. No minimum thresholds were hit anywhere in the basin, any of the criteria. But we were not in ideal conditions in terms of groundwater elevations and storage in the basin. And that's understandable. The basin is experiencing historic drought for the 2nd year in a row. And that is practically what we are including. Just a note that when we include the water use, we're going to show how much use in the basin has happened. We will also show how much recharge everybody has. So we will try to show the positive side that helped, having the conditions of the basin that we have despite of the drought. And we look forward to your comments if you read the draft annual report. Thank you.
Any questions? Doug?
One of the things that I've asked about repeatedly as we began this journey, the legislation establishes a floor based upon a point in time, not based upon the amount of water that lays below us. Do we have any idea of what does lay below us in the way of water below the red line?
So there are estimations of the total storage of the aquifer. There is a large uncertainty in those estimations because we don't have good data and information about the depth of the aquifers and their parameters. So we can estimate how much water can be fit in the aquifers, but that is very different from the amount of water that actually can be taken out sustainably. So the answer is possibly yes, but we don't have an accurate number. But you're right that the legislation is based on groundwater elevation for that specific criteria. But on storage, we can actually use volume that changes. We are not forced to use elevation. So based on different criteria, we're going to use different setup. I don't know, Laura, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I really hope now that we will get the information that the Department of Water Resources is collecting about the geology, we will be able to come up with better and more solid estimates of what it's really available. So I think you are aware that there were the airborne flights, and those flights should give us information about the underground and the geology. And with that, we might be able to come up with a better, more solid estimates. I just want to point out that one thing that we need to remember is that we always need to look at the amount of storage that is available, but also the impact that we may have on the stream interaction. And so we need to balance many different things within the basin.
We
Zach,
must learn much more than we know now,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it seems
is-
that we must be actively working towards the ability to utilize whatever water that is below us that we can without doing the things that are the concerns, subsidence, etc.
Yeah. And I think we clearly wrote this in the GSP, and honestly, even in one of the grant application that we wrote for the county, we clearly said that there will be the need to better understand the spatial distribution of the groundwater which is available and where would be best to use it, and where would be best to avoid using too much. You see what I mean? Because there are locations that might have a bigger impact on the surface water system, and other location where in case of necessities you can probably pump a little more, because we understand that dry years like the one you had last year and probably the one that is coming are kind of critical condition. Zach, sorry.
Thank you.
Welcome.
No problem at all, Laura. Mir, I was going to ask why the change in storage chart is a relative basis. And I think Doug just answered that question with you. It's because we don't really have a number you're comfortable with to define the total storage and make this same chart in an absolute axis.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, pretty much we need to look at the differences. And again, we are not really using these numbers as minimum threshold, because if you remember, we are saying that we are using groundwater elevation as proxies for storage, and that's exactly the reason why, Zach, because we don't have right now we have an idea of a total number, but there is so much uncertainty about what that total number is. And Amir, you can add if I think what it's interesting and is really that to me, when I was looking at all these hydrographs and these results, the problem has really been mostly the recent springs. The recent springs have been really not recovering as they were used to be. So, and that's why I'm pretty satisfied with the fact that triggers are not required by the legislation. So triggers, you can go above them, below them, it doesn't matter. But having the triggers in the spring should really be used as a kind of alarming factor. Okay, the spring was bad. Do we have to do something to help out in the fall or not? So I think, right, what we can see is really that the spring seems to tell us a little bit of the story with some months ahead, so we can start planning.
Yeah, Zach, just to add to that, so the storage, so we are not required to provide any numbers on total storage because that's basically uncertain in most of the basins. So the change in storage is what really counts, and the reason for that, so the basin, Ukiah Basin, has not had historically storage problems because the demand is relatively low. But the change in storage actually relates directly to the meat of the legislation, which is a sustainable yield that we needed to define. And the sustainable yield in Ukiah, we defined it as the historical pumping. What we did say that can increase based on other situations. So like Laura said, and Mr. Crane mentioned, basically we have other problems in the basin. So we can pump more as long as the depletion is fine. So that's the balance that we need to manage here in terms of changing annual storage. So I don't think annual storage changes are still problematic despite the drought, but we need to look at other criteria that is in the legislation, like the depletion and the ground elevations that we said. But like you said, the Ukiah is comparably a low demand basin. So storage, we were not expecting to have storage problems. And as soon as we get the spring based on historical data, we should be back to the zero area. So hopefully we get that spring soon.
Any questions from board members? Are we good? Are there any questions from the general public? Devin.
Hey, good afternoon. Amir, I forgot to ask this yesterday at the TAC meeting. So this is premised, correct me if I'm wrong, we had 2 wells, right? The long-term measurement wells. Did we ever figure out the third and why DWR, that data wasn't provided? I guess that's the first question. And then what would you anticipate for next year's report premised off of getting some of this additional data coming in on the geologies? Would that change this, would you anticipate, or at least make some more accuracies?
So on the first question, I sent the information just today to Michael. So we're going to follow up with DWR. We don't know why that was discontinued. So they assessed their wells a couple of years ago, and they actually wanted to take out another well that we needed in the basin. And we had communication with them, and they continued that monitoring based on our request. This one, we're not expecting it to stop. So we're going to communicate with them and see where that goes. In terms of data from the flyover, the geology that you mentioned. So it provides a lot of data for us. It needs some processing. It will help all aspects of the GSP. What I can say is the impact would come in the 5-year review update when we actually update the GSP based on the information and data. So for the next 5 years, we already set these RMPs and these wells. We can adjust them if we need to, but basically the intention is to continue with these wells that we set for the next 5 years, and then in the GSP review and the update, based on the new data and all the information that we get in the next 5 years, we can adjust the plan in any way that is reasonable and necessary. So I would say for next year, basically we're going to have better information for depletion. So if we see one of these RMPs going down, we can actually look at all the wells that we drilled and we now have data from to see what the reason was, and probably we can figure out. For this year we couldn't because we didn't have any wells around it. So it helps, but I think that the significant impact of these new data would actually be in the 5-year review update of the GSP.
I have a question from Dominic.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, so we flew the Ukiah Basin in November with our AAM program, and that data should be processed and interpreted sometime 6 to 12 months after then. And then just for time frame, just to give you that, and then also to let you know that you probably know this, but if not, the AAM process doesn't detect water. But what it does detect is like the subsurface geology. Well, actually, it's detecting the resistivity, and then it has to be interpreted from bore logs and stuff like that. But so all that raw data, the interpreted data, all that will be publicly available. So hopefully that can help with your modeling. Yeah, I just wanted to provide some more information. Thank you.
So Dominic, just a quick question, when with that, are you able to tell the difference between solid rock and alluvium?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is it's scanning like a 2-mile wide swath, so it's pretty big, kind of big picture view of things, and then it's scanning all the way down to 1,000 feet, and kind of you're looking at slices basically, and so what we get back is just resistivity values. We're kind of then having the scientists like interpret that data based on the borehole lithology. So they look at various wells that have been drilled, and what is there? Is it sand, whatever, and what resistivity did we get at that depth versus the borehole log, and then we can correlate. This is rock, or this is sand, or this is clay, whatever it is. So obviously there will be some uncertainty, but also that data will be given as well. So some things will be more certain than others.
Can you actually come up with a 3-dimensional image of?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're also working on, not me, but someone within or a team within our department is working on a GIS tool that will allow the public to actually visualize in 3D each of these scanned areas. And so you can actually like step through it and see with a legend what is in each area. So that should be pretty helpful. And like I said, all that data will be available both in our data viewer, our Sigma data viewer, but also we have our open data portal. And so I'd imagine, when you're updating the model, they would probably want the raw data to bring into their model, or the interpreted data, whatever, but not looking at it through the web browser. And so, however you need the data, we can get it to you.
And what other basins have you looked at in Mendocino County?
Let me see. Okay, so well, in that area, at the same time was Big Valley, and that's in Lake County, but
Right.
Santa Rosa Valley, Petaluma Valley, Napa Sonoma Valley. So I think Ukiah, I'm sorry, my geography is not the best, but I think Ukiah Valley may have been the only one.
Okay.
But I'd have to look at our map, because right now I'm just looking at a spreadsheet. So I'd have to look at a map to orient myself to see if I'm.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think, Dominic, it's Ukiah is the only one in Mendocino County. When we provided the information, that was only for, I think it was mostly for the basins where GSP was under development, right? So
Right.
So Ukiah is the only one.
Right. So it's, someday we really, really, really want this information for some of our other basins, such as Round Valley and Big and Long Valley, and so that we can get a better sense of water sustainability out of there. They're not considered to be medium or high priority basins, but there is a lot of pumping activity going on. So there's a lot of concern. Plus we have the arsenic in some cases being an issue as well. So, okay, any other questions from the general public before we move off of this item?
I see Zach and
Zach.
David.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question back to Dominic. Is there a vertical and a horizontal resolution that you guys are going to assign to the data, or is that still undetermined?
So yeah, it's 2 miles wide is each square basically that we're collecting the data. And then I don't recall off the top of my head how frequently, because it kind of basically depends on how fast they're flying, how large the area is that they're scanning forward. I think it's much less than 2 miles. And then the depth is down to 1,000 feet, and it's not linear. So as you get deeper, each chunk of data is actually a larger area, but I think the smallest resolution in the vertical is 10 feet.
And Zach, just to add on that, we sent proposed, I don't know if that was followed 100%, but we proposed flight lanes, and the flight lanes that we sent to the DWR is basically following the river and the areas that we had data gaps, or we foresaw that we might have recharge projects. So we try to emphasize the areas that we thought would be important. So they fly over those areas and then it's extended. And the basin is not that wide, so 2 miles kind of covers most of the basin in most of it.
Devin.
Just a quick question in terms of change, for this report or further reports, Sean White mentioned it yesterday about, assumptions of the recharge contribution from the recycled water project to be around 1,500 acre feet. As we look into other sorts of types of those projects, how is that accounted for within sort of the overall scope of change?
So in terms of recycled water, I think it was delivered last year too. To the full extent that was possible. So the ground elevations that we see are including that recharge. So the impact that they had basically positively impacted the ground elevation. We still had lowering, but probably we would have more if the recycled water was not there. So overall, in terms of recharge projects, they would help groundwater elevation. The extent of that help depends on the location and how the recharge is going. They'll also help the depletion if we put them in right locations and we do the right thing for them. So there are positive projects for this basin. And like Sean mentioned yesterday, so the amount of storage change that we have in the basin, if you're just looking at storage, is not that much. So recharge projects can actually help. Like if you had 600 acre feet, if that number is right, then probably one recharge project could actually make that a zero if we had it. So I think for Ukiah Valley Basin, depending on the right location being selected, recharge projects can be very positive.
That's accounted for in the model already, it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But basically, Devon, what we can do, and it's not really required for this year, but then if we can get a sort of, we need to work a little bit more on the model, get a better accounting, 1,500 is what can be applied, but then how much of this is really contributing to the aquifer. And then what we can have in the part of the report that it's not really very developed right now, which is the implementation, we can start setting aside numbers there and then have a better accounting at the 5 years report. That's the way I would do it. You know, this report, what Amir did so far, it's really setting up everything. So hopefully next year you take this one, change the numbers, and everything comes out automatically, and then we can start updating. So that's the way.
And then I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So on that, I remember we had these presentations about future scenarios and like PVP. In those, we actually put in recycled water numbers in the model. But recycled water project was basically started 2019. So our historical model simulation does not cover recycled water. So these green bars do not have recycled water in it. The blue bars don't really rely on the water use. They're based on the measured ground elevation. So if the recycled water helped the elevation, it's already considered. But going to the future, the model will have recycled water. Yes.
Okay, any more questions? Any recommendations to the consultants before they make our report final? I don't believe we need to take any action on this other than just to receive the presentation.
Amir, can I ask a question? Sorry, Glenn. You know, I know there was some missing data. Is there anything that the board can do to assist with getting that data to you?
The major data gap that we have is the water used by the small water agencies, Millview, Willow, Redwood Valley County, Calpella. So those small water agencies, since we had their data in the GSP, and that would help us. So if we get that, it would be really helpful. We welcome any other data, but based on the GSP period, that's the only data that we're missing, and we really need that. And that's part of the process that we need to be done every year. So every year we need to have this data basically sent from the agency, city, and the RRFC.
Yeah, one suggestion that comes to my mind, and this is what I see is happening in other basins, is if the GSA can do something like having a sort of agreement, like every March we need this and this and this data from these agencies, so that then you are going to save time for the future years, and the data will always come in a certain format. So everything will be faster for every annual report. I have to say, from what I understood, for this year, we can even say that data were not available on time. You know, it's only 2 months after the GSP, but I think it's good to try to make the effort and see if we can gather them. And then in any case, set this up as the future planning. Every March 1st, for example, I'm just guessing on a day, we need all this data from this list of agencies. And this is something we can provide to the, it's already provided in the report. The idea was to have, together with the report, a sort of README file, so what it's needed, so that everybody knows what needs to be provided.
Or can you actually put that in a separate memo to us so that we can work on it?
Yeah. That's something that we can do. Maybe, I mean, we can also do it right away, like all the data that you collected, just make a quick summary. So what you got so far and the format, and then if we can get it for this year, good. You know, we have still 3 weeks to go.
Yeah, I'll send a memo. I'll put it together and send a memo to Michael to share with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be helpful, because then we can actually, directly call people who might be able to help us complete our data set.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know, do we need to have a formal vote, Nicole, to accept this?
No,
I think
no, you don't need to formally accept
Okay.
the presentation unless you're specifically providing direction to staff, like, as a board or as by order of the chair. It's not necessary to vote to accept a presentation. You can just listen to it.
Okay, so we've done that. We want to thank Laura and Amir, and we know that we have a little bit of work to do to help. make the report just a little better. So we'll work on that if you send us a memo. Al, is there a question or comment?
Yeah, you know, all the data they're missing from all the members of IRWA, there's only one person who's in charge of all those, and that's Jared Walker. So, you know, there's not a lot of people to pester on this. Ross is their representative, and he's not here, so we can't pester him directly. But I think Ross and Jared would be the targets for, you know, there's no reason to wait any longer. Let's see, like they don't have that information. They just haven't bothered to give it to us, and we only have one boat around up there.
So I've reached out to Jared. He has the water use data request, and last I spoke with him, he was still working on it, and I just reached out to him recently. But so he knows it's in the docket.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we just need to harass.
Yeah, I'm happy to give him a call and say, Jared, about that data.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing.
And explain that it helps us in making our report more accurate, so that we you know, are have as good a report as possible, because the better our report, the better we're going to look ultimately, as we understand what we're measuring, and we don't have big wild fluctuations because of major data gaps. Amber.
One thing that I don't know if it would be appropriate to include it, Amir, but we had discussed that we need to have some of the entities for the water quality monitoring to add specific constituents to their sampling, and we reached out to them to see if they would be willing to do that, and I think most, if not all, were willing to do that. Would that be appropriate to include in that information request? To
Yes.
remind them, because I think they were willing to do it, but I'm not sure if everybody remembers that they need to do that.
Yes, we need to do that. So that's, I think it's boron that everybody needs to measure, and I think some of the agencies actually measured it based on the data they got for the last year. It's pretty measured it, but we have wells that need to be measured for boron, and I think the agreement should kind of figure out how that's done. So we need to do that, because the first year of sampling for some of those wells is coming, and it's better to do it with other sampling that they do. So that's a good point. And we can actually, if we do it, we can actually put in the annual report as an action that the GSA took.
Yeah.
But this is something that we really need to follow up, because our compliance basically relies on it.
And the GSA had offered to pay for whatever the cost was, even though the cost wasn't very high. But I think pretty much everybody just said, don't really worry about it, because it's not a large cost. But they need to remember to do it.
Yeah, and if it's, you know, if not, we could make some arrangement to sample and send it in. It shouldn't be that big a deal.
And just one other suggestion. Oh, sorry, Amber.
I was going to say, I think it was as simple as them, you know, checking another box on their chain of custody form when they do their sampling that they already have to do. So it was pretty simple, as opposed to having to do a whole nother sampling event.
Okay.
Yeah, we kind of scheduled it in the same frequency with the other sampling, so they can do it just with the other sampling that they do. So it should be easy. I was going to suggest that if anybody has, so we tried to put language about the programs that were implemented, like the curtailments that happened. So the situation that happened in the previous year in the annual report, it's important to mention that. We tried to explain the severity of the drought, but any of the agencies, if you did a program that it's worth including in the annual report, if you have language that if there are things that we need to consider and put in the annual report, it would be great if you just email it to us and we can put it in the plan. Like as much as we can include all the actions and all the programs that the basin-wide was taken to reduce the impact of the drought, I think it's better, and it's good to include in the annual report. So if you have information, we can definitely include in the annual report.
Okay. Anything else before we move away from this item? Okay, barring none, well, thank you, Amira and Laura, and we look forward to seeing the final report. And send us that memo with things that you need, and we'll try to try to wrap it up.
Thank you. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So next is item C, discussion regarding workshop with West Jose on transition of administrative services and Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency priorities for the coming year.
So we have representatives from West Jose here, Eric and Andy, who plan to hold a workshop in April, and they wanted to have a short discussion today to sort of plan for that workshop, to build an agenda, talk about dates, times, things like that. So I will let them take it away.
Great, thank you, Amber. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to the board. We really appreciate that you guys approved our contract, and we really look forward to working with you and the rest of the TAC members going forward in 2022 and beyond. So Amber, just a clarifying question in the interest of time and being cognizant of the other items on the agenda for today's meeting. Do you want me to do a shorter version of the discussion, or do I have a little bit of time to work with this?
We only have one more item, and it should be fairly
Okay.
short. So
Okay.
Do what you need to do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. So as mentioned, we are planning to kick off with a workshop to get with the board and the TAC to discuss several items. We're thinking about splitting it off into two different pieces, and I'm also looking for your input today on what you prefer and getting some of your feedback. So we're thinking about doing a 1.5-hour workshop as part one, where we meet with the board. And then we would do a quick little break in between, and then we would have another 1.5-hour workshop with the TAC to discuss other items with the TAC. Or another option we could do is we can combine a meeting with the TAC and the board. So those are just two ideas I wanted to throw out there for what we're thinking about for the workshop. And the objectives of the workshop are to discuss some agenda items, and in no particular order, I will mention them. So identify preferred communication methods and exchange of online materials. That's obviously, sometimes that can be a challenge when there's a lot of information going back and forth. So be defining that. We also would like to do some goal setting, where we're looking at 1 to 3 year goals and objectives, so that we can get ourselves organized around the projects and acquisition of grant funds and those items that we really want to focus on the first year, and then also what we want to focus on over a 3-year time horizon. We'll also have discussions about potential cost savings where it can make sense. So that's another potential agenda item. And then a couple other ones are talking about the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget, existing contracts, and also well and stream gauge monitoring contracts for the fiscal year 2022-2023. And then any other additional items that we think could the GSA can provide to help the Basin members in the community. So I'll stop for a moment and I'll open it up to the board. Is there any preference for a workshop to be split into two, where we meet with the board and then we meet with the TAC separately, or is there a strong desire to combine so we have the TAC members and the board members present in one meeting?
From an efficiency point of view, it seems like it might be good to have all of us here as one community. Other board members have thoughts?
I have one. This is Al. My concern is that we end up kind of all coming together and milling about. I think I would find it more useful if each of the members had an opportunity to have a conversation with Eric or someone there about what they think priorities are, where things should be. And through that individual conversations, the workshop then would take the form of, here's priorities that have been identified. And then as a group, how would you order them? So that was my thought.
It's an excellent piece of feedback. Really appreciate that.
Does anybody have an opposing view? The
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I was going to say the function of the TAC is really to be kind of the technical advisors to our consultants, and really be the ones that are able to go down into the details on the components of the operation of the plan, and the function of this board is a little bit more in the policy arena. So that's kind of the difference. Although I know that most of the people sitting here are also technically pretty able to understand what we're hearing and looking at. So, if our consultants offer to conduct 2 meetings, and if we don't have to twist our arms to do that, then it allows the groups to have, a slightly different focus and plenty of time. I think early on, it is good to have those discussions. And I guess as part of the preparation for Eric and Andy, you're working with groundwater sustainable agencies right now, aren't you? Besides us?
That is correct. Yep. The Santa Rosa Plain is one of them.
Okay, so you know the drill, and you know what has to be done in terms of tasks going forward.
Yeah.
Dominic, you have a question or a comment?
Just a comment. I know you all know that you requested and were approved for facilitation support services, and one of the services that was approved was governance development. So I don't know if that's something you'd want to pursue using, using Stantec's help or not, but just to remind you that that is an option if that's helpful for you all, that does fall under your contract. So I'm not trying to make any decision for you one way or another, but just wanted to remind you.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a very helpful piece of feedback. I appreciate that. And just to point that out, we actually will be talking to Stantec tomorrow to discuss more about that and their role and how things will be proceeding forward. So we're already thinking about that. Yes, Mr. Crane.
I think there's a benefit of the TAC and this body being together because we don't have much cross-pollination. That's an opportunity to learn a bit about their perspective and them to learn a bit more about our perspective. So I'm a fan of a meeting that include both groups.
Thank you for that. And with a combined meeting, would a 2-hour time frame or a 2.5-hour time frame be reasonable? We want to be conscientious of having too long of a meeting because that is, one, difficult to potentially schedule, but also if we're on task and we have a good agenda, we can probably be really effective in a 2-hour time frame. But I also want to throw out a 2.5-hour time frame if that is also a reasonable assumption to make.
Well, 2.5 is starting to push it. Another possibility is to have kind of a 1 hour of joint conversation and then follow with breakouts from there that are specific to each board.
Yeah.
If that's an efficient use of time.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an option too. Okay, well, that's really helpful. And Alfred, I appreciate you pointing out the individual discussions with the board members. That is one of our intentions to have those discussions. And so that is something that I would be doing as part of the pre-work, I would say, leading up to the workshop to help develop the agenda items and further discuss that. And so just in terms of timing, we're aiming somewhere between the second half of April and the first half of May. And to facilitate scheduling. A doodle pool will be put together. We'll send that out in the near future to organize everyone's responses to try to find the best time for the maximum amount of attendance. And we can obviously go back and forth and dialogue on that to make sure we can get the right meeting time and date. And as of right now, we're thinking to have this be virtual, but I also want to pause and ask the group, is there any particular interest to have it in person versus virtual, given that the restrictions are lifted in that time frame?
This is Zach Robinson here. My observation would be that Zoom meetings with large groups I find to be less productive, and I think you'll probably get less feedback of what you're looking for. So if you gather there's a certain level of comfort with the participants, in person may be more productive for your value.
Yep. I see a thumbs up from Douglas. Yep. Alfred?
You know, as a counterpoint to that, group dynamics can drive a lot of what takes place when a bunch of people are in one space. There tend to be those who dominate and those who don't. And if there's any advantage to having everyone in a little box on a screen and having to sort of raise your hand to speak, I believe that gives it sort of reduces that occurrence, but I don't know that that's enough reason to do it.
Well, good facilitation helps prevent that too, of having
Exactly.
to really dominate the conversation. And I agree with you, Al, it often happens. Often there's some people who just have to comment on everything. But we also, if you ever want to tune into any of our cannabis meetings, the same thing happens on Zoom. So, you know, it's a lot about the audience who's involved as well.
Great. Well, excellent feedback. Thank you very much for that. It sounds like an in-person meeting would be preferred. So we'll definitely keep that in mind. As mentioned, we'll send out a doodle poll in the near future to organize our schedules and to find the best date and time to bring the groups together. And we will explore formats for the workshop and come to a final decision on that. And we'll coordinate with Amber and others to make that happen. So you can look forward to future emails from me, Andy, and others on our team about that in the near future. And thank you very much for your time today. And we're really excited to work with every single one of you. And we're excited for the next few years together. Appreciate it.
So Eric, just one other thing on your doodle poll,
Yep.
you might ask some preferences about what people want to do in terms of live meetings, separate meetings.
Yes, absolutely.
That'd be a good way for us to really go directly to the group and see what they think.
Yes. Great suggestion.
Okay. Any questions of Eric from the general public before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, with that, Eric and Andy, really great to be working with you, and we look forward to interactions very soon.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, next we move on to agenda item 4, which is discussion regarding the California Department of Water Resources Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program's implementation grant and consideration of potential projects around to grant funding. Amber, you want to start off the discussion, or is this one for Laura?
This would be Amir and Laura.
Yeah. Amir, can you share your screen? And I'm really sorry, I'll get it started and then Amir will continue because I really have to hop off at 3. And really, it doesn't have to be a long discussion. What we did for you, and you can look it through your board material, we went through the evaluation that the Department of Water Resources did on the submitting the GSPs submitting in 2020. So these are the overdrafted basin. And we kind of made a summary for you on which were the key comments, key things we need to think about, and with the idea of making a connection between these possible problems that have been highlighted in the plans and what we suggested to do in our GSP. So most of the GSPs that were developed for the lower part of Central Valley, they have been judged incomplete, and the letter went out in January. And now the GSAs, they have 180 days to try to answer the comments and provide more compelling justification for whatever happened. So this is where we are right now. So the improvements need to be submitted to DWR by summer 2022. Then there will be another evaluation. And if the GSPs are still judged inadequate, then State Water Board may intervene. But I don't know. I don't see this probably happening so soon, and probably there will be more steps in between. Couple of comments. The GSPs really, some of them, they were considered not really looking into how to address undesirable results, and particularly there was not enough attention to drinking water and land subsidence. Obviously, Ukiah doesn't have the land subsidence issue, is not one of our concern in Ukiah, and what I was saying yesterday is that we just need to take away land subsidence and substitute it with interconnected surface water. That's gonna be the problem in Ukiah. There was a general requirements of to improve the coordination of data and the methods and the management approaches. Like there was a lot of the GSAs, you know, Ukiah is kind of lucky. You are in your own boundary. You don't have neighbors, let's say. You don't have to talk to anybody in a sense. That's not true, but you don't really share a physical boundary. And while the basins in Central Valley, they do. And so there was a general lack of coordination. I have to say, we really did something better because we had a great coordination with what's happening in the basins down in Sonoma. So some of the approaches that we took for our minimum thresholds are similar, or at least on the same line as what Sonoma was doing. So I think this will show really like as a good and strong approach. In general, there was also some requirements, requests from DWR to really improve the ideas of what can be done in terms of working on supply and working on demand, and which actions will be taken. And this is really just to give you a very quick summary. And I think, Amir, if you go to the next.
I wanted to make a correction. So if we don't have, so that 8 of 42 that we have, 8 was approved, not incomplete. So the rest was incomplete. So just 8 of the 42 were approved.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
I read it correct. I had it in my mind.
Yeah, that's my mistake. I apologize.
Only 8 were approved. I don't really want to spend much time through going through this. We put it there for your information, and when we can discuss it at a later time. It's really trying to give you a quick summary so you don't have to read the 42 letters of comments. You can just look at our 2 pages. And I think, Amir, I would go straight to the implementation grant. So the implementation grant, the solicitation is already out, and basically you can pretty much already start thinking about which are the actions that you would like to include in the plan, and then the implementation grant needs to be submitted in September. I think our goal was really just to put it under your radar. We need to start thinking, and yesterday we started discussing with the TAC about what can be included and what was in our GSPs that was highlighted as a priority. And just to give you some ideas of the timeline, sorry, Amir, can you go back? Okay. The solicitation is open. Grant proposal should be provided by September, review in April, May 2023, awards in June, and money available late summer, I think. So this is kind of the timeline for you to think about what's coming down the road. And what we were considering is that we included here a list of things that were in the GSPs, and that might be kind of based on the review that we saw from DWR. These are the things that we are kind of highlighting as possible future study that might need to be done as a first priorities. So in the GSPs, in terms of data gap, we were talking about the need for more geophysics. Now DWR is doing did already the airborne flights, so we can get some information there. There was also suggestion about pilot recharge projects, a better understanding of the well condition and some assessment of what it's out in the basin that maybe we didn't have information about during the GSP development. We also talked about a possible isotope studies to figure out location of possible recharge in the fringes of the basin. And then remember there was a discussion about a fee study or some kind of fee structure to keep paying for the next 20 years. There is the need for keeping updating the integrated models so that then at year 5, the model will be ready to be used for the GSP updates. Through discussion with the TAC and Sonoma Water, we had a long list of scenarios that include PVP and climate change that we were saying they should be developed sooner rather than later, and now maybe even sooner than what we were thinking a year ago. And then some special study and some additional monitoring that should help us mostly answer the question of interconnected surface water and how the different parts of the aquifers are really working together. And so this was not meant for really you making any decision or whatever. It's just to refresh your mind about what we discussed for 4 years, and then now in the past few months we didn't discuss much. So it's mostly to give you a starting point that and start thinking about it. And I think this is pretty much all what we had. There will be the need to really sit down and decide, okay, which are the projects that we have to take from the GSP and put directly into the implementation grant.
So are we going to get feedback from on our plan before the implementation
No.
grant? No, so we have to kind of guess.
Yeah. So we have, Glenn, the idea is that because we may not get anything for 2 years.
Mhm.
So we need to act imagining everything is good. We have to keep going. That's the
And
way.
So based on our report today, we're finding that if we could store 1,000 acre feet into the aquifer, that would be a good thing, correct?
Yeah.
So that's why doing our pilot recharge projects would be smart. And I'm taking part of that is to figure out where to put the recharge projects, where the best infiltration rates are and where they're going to affect the largest share of the basin, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it seems like that's going to be one of our priorities, probably.
Mhm.
Um,
And you know, Glenn, we should find out something soon about what we submitted also for the emergency drought planning, and probably we will have just to join forces on what everybody's doing. And yeah, it's going to be important to really be careful on selecting the right location for this recharge. And that's why we really would like to improve the model. So the model, once it's a little better, then, and it's mostly we need to update the model to 2021 and use it for some scenarios. And I'm really sorry, guys. Amir can answer all the questions. I really have to jump off.
yeah, we're kind of running out of time. Zach, go ahead and ask your question.
Just an observation, Laurel Marcus from CLSI has received approval to go ahead and write out one single grant application on our behalf, funded through an existing grant that she has, being the watershed. Oh boy, I forget the descriptor there. So there's an opportunity to do this at low cost.
Well, that's exciting. So it sounds like we need to be working with Laurel on this then and have a conversation.
And Glenn, just to add, based on the latest reviews, we did most of the things that WR requested from other basins in terms of domestic wells, but they wanted a schedule and implementation of a program to reduce the impacts on domestic wells, and we think one of the priorities can be conducting the well inventory and well assessment to just have a better idea of the wells in the basin. That would really help the GSP for the 5-year update.
Okay. Any other director comments or questions? Any comments or questions from the general public? Well, okay, well, notwithstanding, I guess Dominic?
Yeah, sorry, just really quickly, as you go through the grant process, you have any questions about anything to do with your application, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to help answer any questions.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for that offer. I'm sure we'll take you up on it. Okay, so this, once again, no action needed on this. Is that correct? All right. Well, thank you again, Amira and Laura. So we'll be working on this together, and I know. So with that, we go to directors' reports. Does anyone have anything to report?
This is Zach, and I just have some news to share. As people may have noticed, there's a lot of sprinklers on in the ag community right now. It's kind of a massive experiment going on right now. But the logic is we want our grapevines to wake up and not realize quite how droughty it is right now. And there's a massive attempt to basically re-wet the soil profile. This looks very similar to what we might be doing if we were trying to stimulate groundwater recharge through our sprinkler systems on ag land. Although perhaps the current sprinkler runs wouldn't be of the same duration, we would be really going for if we're aiming for the recharge goal. But nonetheless, when we look at some of our monitoring data from wells and with some awareness on where this water is being applied right now, we may see some results, which would be interesting and informative. And as kind of a baseline, Glenn, feel free to correct me on this, but my recollection is 1 hour of sprinkler time is 1/10 of an inch of rain.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing you could do is also change nozzles, so you increase the precip time and run it over a smaller area.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, interesting stuff going on right now, and more to come maybe.
Yeah, well, I can tell you as someone who's doing some of this sprinkling, I'm doing it because I'm expecting curtailment. So I'm using the old principle that if you are pretty much at field capacity at the beginning of bud break, with most crops, you'll get about 60% of your yield over the course of the year if you get no further rain. So that's the old rule of thumb and for agronomic crops. So that's what I'm thinking might happen. So that's partially why I'm watering, and I'm trying to put about 3 to 4 inches into the soil profile. That's my target. Other questions or comments?
Just a question. I want to see. So the source of this water is basically the Russian River flow or the stream water. It's not groundwater.
It is in my case it's riparian flow. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering about the recharge practice that it's going to simulate basically. So it's stream flow to the groundwater.
Yeah. So in my case too, it's going to, anything that's extra is going to go right back into the river because I have clay down at about 30 feet. So yeah. It's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that's basically what we were thinking about doing for farm recharge, getting river water and put it on the ground. So hopefully we can see some information from the groundwater management.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments? Al?
The only comment, we talk a lot about this, and it's a nice idea and all that, but they always ask the question, how do you know that it's true? And that's to the point that Zach made, that if we are able to measure something relevant at the time that all these things are taking place, then we might be able to answer that question and know whether it's a great idea that really it doesn't matter, or it's something that's we should put a lot of effort into pursuing.
Well, obviously, sooner or later, there's got to be some research and some instrumentation, and that's kind of the next steps. And it might be one of the things that we list as one of our recharge experiments that we want to do, or demonstrations that we want to do for managing the aquifer. Doug.
Might be worth a discussion with Sean White regarding purple pipe water that's available in part of the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And that may play into that analysis.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I would have a conversation with Sean, just period, anyway. He goes, that's a good idea. So, okay, before we end the meeting, are there any public comments on items not on the agenda? All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much for participating, and you know, we'll see you in the near future. Looking forward to working with our new consultants, and have a good rest of the day. So we'll talk to you later. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Glenn.
You
Thank
bet.
you. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.